Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation. This is a repeat of my presentation supporting regional growth through, and it's about the Train to Cessnock initiative. So this is about the idea of reintroducing passenger trains between Maitland and Cessnock, mining infrastructure that's been there for a while and is now not used, and that can be repurposed for great community use. It is the best value rail project in Australia, that we think, and we'll get to that and explain why that is throughout the presentation. Just to be clear, my name is Bill Palazzi. I'm a rail consultant. I've spent over 35 years in the rail industry. I'm also one of the members of the Train to Cessnock team. And just to be clear as well, I'm not getting paid for this work, and I have no commercial interest in the Train to Cessnock except to see that, or no interest except to see that the community of Cessnock gets a better public transport service using the infrastructure that's available. We'll get into it. So the presentation today, we'll go through a bit about the Train to Cessnock campaign, although I'll go through that very quickly, or I presume anyone watching this knows a bit about it already. We'll talk about the transport needs of the Cessnock area, what the South Maitland Railway's corridor is and what it offers for us, and then what the project is, so what it will take, what the outcome, what we think the costs and timeframes are, and longer term possibilities associated with the corridor. So we'll get straight into it. So this slide gives you a brief summary of our Train to Cessnock campaign. It started following the New South Wales state election where Andrew Fenwick, the other part of the Train to Cessnock campaign, ran as a candidate, and then what turned up was the need to get public transport as a key, the issue of public transport in the Cessnock area as a key issue. So we formed Train to Cessnock in November. In February, a petition that Andrew launched closed with 2,749 signatures, which was a great result, and that was presented to New South Wales Parliament. We also then, in early 2024, released this document, you'll see at the bottom there, the case for the Train to Cessnock, which was a pretty formative document explaining why this, or the opportunity that was presented, and why this should be an initiative that the state government should pursue. Since 2024, we've had a lot of, about 2 years of campaign thus far, and we've had, as you can see, growing support from the public and from media, particularly from the Herald and NBN News, but also a bunch of other media organisations around the Hunter Valley. We've also had growing support from local organisations. Cessnock, the Mayor of Cessnock came on board, Dan Watton. Cessnock Council became supportive, Business Hunter, the RCBU became supportive, Hunter Joint Organisations, and now the Committee for the Hunter is also on board. And then you can see there we've got support from local political representatives being Dan Watton, the Mayor of Cessnock, Clayton Barr, State Member, and Dan Rapaccioli and Meryl Swanson, our federal members. We're obviously in mid-2026. A key upcoming milestone for us is the March 2026 state election, or March 2027, I should say. And so we'll be looking to how we can make this a key issue in the election campaign, noting already that the New South Wales Nationals have come out and said this is part of their policy platform, which is great to see. Our objectives, and the box on the bottom, you see we're calling on the New South Wales government to move to acquire the corridor, get to why that's important in a minute, to commit to getting passenger services operating on the corridor as soon as possible, and to allocate initial funding for a full business case and design. So we'll crack on. This diagram shows it comes from the Hunter Regional Strategic Integrated Transport Plan, which was released late 2025, updated early this year, 2026. It gives you the context of the area. You'll see on the diagram here, Cessnock and Curry, and then the sort of jagged straight line around that. This is the Cessnock LGA here. So the corridor which goes from Maitland through to Curry and through to Cessnock is primarily in the Cessnock LGA, but a little bit into the Maitland LGA, as you can see there, between Curry and Maitland. So we'll talk a lot about Cessnock LGA, but bear in mind that it covers both. You can see the red lines on this, which is where the current railway lines go, and they conveniently circle straight around Cessnock. One of the interesting things about this area, and I'll talk about it in a minute, is the fact that this is recognised as a public transport black spot. So I did actually one stage in my better moments look at how many buses were actually running in the Cessnock Curry area. There was about 4 buses at any one time during peak hour servicing Cessnock and Curry. That's been recently increased, or will be increased soon, but it's still nowhere near enough people, and nowhere near enough public transport for a population the size of Cessnock. If I move on a little bit, this slide shows you some information coming out of the Cessnock City City Council Traffic and Transport Strategy back in 2023. You see the pink there is a page I've taken straight out of that. The population, one of the key issues around Cessnock, the population is expected to grow to 112,000 people by 2041. At the moment, it's about 65,000 people in the LGA. So that's a 40% increase of what we have right now. And there's already these sorts of problems. You'll see that the road congestion is the #1 traffic-related concern of residents. I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm sure if you're in Sydney, for example, you wouldn't believe that congestion can ever be as bad as in Sydney, and maybe it's not. We'll talk about what the reality is for people up here. 97% of all trips are by private vehicles. This is simply because there is no realistic public transport option, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You'll see 44% of the people are population of vulnerable users. That's elderly people, that's people with disabilities, and even children. It's a greater rate than most, or than state average certainly. You'll see, well, in 2024, the Committee for the Hunter released a report looking at public transport in the Hunter area. They noted that Cessnock was a well-known public transport black spot, and that reflects the data that we're seeing through the City Council as well. Just to give you a framework an understanding of transport and public transport options around Cessnock, I've done a little bit of playing here with Google Maps. And you'll see here, what I've chosen is an area in Cessnock, downtown Cessnock to start with, and then a trip going to Newcastle interchange. So the normal way to drive would be through Cessnock, and then through Neath, up through Abermain, and then to the back of Western, onto the Hunter Expressway down here, and then you'd come out and go through the west of Newcastle through here. This is as good as it gets. This was taken on in an evening, so with zero traffic around, zero congestion, and you'll see that the time you get is 46 minutes. It doesn't get better than that. But I also did it, again, asked the question of, well, I wanted to get to Newcastle at 8:30 on a Monday morning. And you'll see here that starting point's the same, end point's the same. And we end up being 1 hour 10 or 1 hour 20 minutes now. So we've gone up from 45 to 1 hour 20. So it's a 35-minute increase in the journey time. And the congestion is really all around here, between Cessnock and the Hunter Expressway, and this here in the end west of Newcastle. You can see it's now saying the preferred is to go up here via Hexham, because the congestion in here is worse. Now, imagine going back to that question of population growth. All that population growth is going into here, around Cliffley, around Head and Greta. Some of it's going into Western, a lot of it's going into Bellbird here. So all those people who want to get to Newcastle are going to be travelling on the same route and just adding the more congestion as you go. You then say, well, what about public transport options? Well, if I wanted to get to Newcastle via public transport by 8:30 on a Monday morning, here are my options. You'll see the best time I get is 1 hour 37 minutes. So noting that travel, a normal drive, 45 minutes, peak hour drive, 1 hour 10, 1 hour 20, here traffic, 1 hour 30. You'll see as well that my options are limited to one option every hour. So depending on when I want to go and how I want to go, I've got very few options. And of course, coming back, I've got the same story. My own experience of having public transport here with my daughter going to school, travelling on one of these buses, was that every time it rained, this bus will be running late, and we'll be waiting for it. And this, I think, is the reality of if you want to use public transport in our area. Just a little bit about the history. So this map shows you from 1950 something about the railways in the Cessnock and Maitland area. You'll see there I've highlighted everything. So Newcastle on the eastern side there, and you have the dark lines, which are the main lines that go north and south, or head out from Newcastle. The South Maitland Railways were constructed starting in Maitland and going south and west from there, starting in 1993 and they went through to Cessnock in 1904. So this was built by a bunch of different mining organisations to service their mines in the area. There was about 30 different mines that they were working to. In 1918, it was consolidated to be the South Maitland Railway Proprietary Limited, and it operated through to 2020 when the last coal train ran. There's this other bit through here, which is the Richmond Vale Railway as well. What I'm showing there right now, the blue and the yellow, are the only remaining bits of this corridor, and this is still the operating corridor that operated still till 2020. You see the blue is now owned by a company called Horizon, which is the which is an infrastructure and operating company that's based in Queensland. And then Yancoal owns the last bit from Cessnock down to Bellbird. They were the mining company that ended up owning the final lease of the Pelton mine south of Bellbird. This is the pictures here of the railway in operation. And you'll see not only did it carry coal, but it carried passengers. Starting in 1902, the last service ran in 1972. So this was operated both by the South Maitland Railways and by the New South Wales Government Railways. You can see the picture here is a New South Wales Government Railways train, which was the Cessnock Flyer, coming up through Sydney, and then you've got the rail motors here from the SMR. So this is what this means though is not only do you have a railway line on this corridor, but you've also got legacies in terms of platforms and stations and other things. And in fact, you can see behind me the photo, which is the station at the residual station at Kurri Kurri, and that's one of the sort of facilities you have available or that could be reused in this corridor. Let me just walk you through the corridor from end to end now. So starting at the top, Maitland station's here. You can see that the track actually joins to the main line just west of Maitland Station at a place called East Greta Junction. Then it heads south and west past Gilson Heights and towards Kurri Kurri. Towards Kurri Kurri. For each of these stations here, throughout the corridor, we've identified a few stations or some stations we think would be valuable for the community based on where the community is at the moment. For each station, what I've shown is a circle showing a 1 kilometre radius and a 2 kilometre radius, 2 kilometre radius from the station. Now, typical walking distance, people would debate what is a walking distance to a station. It could be 800 metres, it could be 1 per 2 kilometres. Once you get to things like micro-mobility, things like e-scooters, e-bikes, then it could even be closer to 3 or 4 kilometres. But for the sake of the argument, I've shown 1 or 2. You can see Gilson Heights here, for example, that the population centre of Gilson Heights is clustered on this spot where the station could be. And within that 1 kilometre radius, there's an awful lot of people. In fact, since the time I've taken this screenshot, or was taking this shot of the satellite, the growth in housing in this whole area has expanded dramatically. So that's now all full of housing, and in fact, all the way through down here is full of housing as well. There's something like 5,000 people who live in Gilson Heights now. That was in the 2021 census. It'll be much greater by now, and it'll continue to grow. One of the interesting things about this place was that during 2022, there was flooding of the rivers through here, and Gilson Heights was cut off. The flooding was all through here and all through here, and Gilson Heights was cut off. It was colloquially known as Gilson Island for a little while, for 2 weeks. So transport and access to that community is really vital, and the railway line could help with this. You'll see this area down here, Cliff Lee. This is growing at a rate of notice as well. This whole area through here has also been approved for development right now. This area here was an old aluminium smelter by a company called Hydro. That's now going to be redeveloped as a light industrial site. So you've got right along the railway line, more housing developments, more industrial sites that could be served by the railway line. This section, the middle section, coming through Kurri Kurri and Western Abermain Neath. Again, same story. What I've done is shown some potential station locations and where the walking distance could be. There's about 20,000 people in this area in 2021. That's of course growing, as I've said. These stations, the 4 actually are also the legacy station sites that were the former platforms that are operating, so which could readily be repurposed. As I mentioned behind me is the station at Kurri. you can see that the 20,000 people on this in this area largely are all within 2 kilometres of a station, and so hence there's a great opportunity and a great using stations in those areas could be a great service to those people. One of the real characteristics of this corridor is you don't have to take out houses to make a corridor for the railway line. If you think about things like the high-speed rail, one of the problems that's got is establishing a corridor through a dense urban area, because if you do go on service, you then have to knock down a lot of houses, you have to make space, you have to move a lot of infrastructure. In this instance, you don't have to do any of that. The corridor is there. It's actually the sort of community is built up around that corridor from 100 years ago. And so it's already centred, well located. The stations are well located to service the community. This last section coming through Cessnock and down to Bellbird, again, you can see the way the community is built up around the corridor, and how you can easily fit stations that are servicing a lot of people. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of development in this area around Bellbird, behind the picture there, or behind the writing. And there's a lot of development happening down through Kersley as well. There's about 25,000 people in that picture there, and again, rapidly growing. We do view in the longer term the opportunity to build this down, connect through to Millfield as well, which is just off the bottom corner of the map down here. And now there's again massive amounts of houses being built down in Millfield. About 5,000 people in the 2021 facility and 2021 census, but a lot more going in there right now. So just to give you so here I've got some photos that show you the condition of the track right now, and to give you a view of what's got to be done to upgrade the track. Starting at Bellbird, then Kersley, Abermain, Neath, and Gilston Heights. At Bellbird, you can see there that bit of track. This is the part of the track that's owned by Yancoal, and a lot of this track is in quite good condition. You'll see that corner there, particularly. You've got concrete slopes, you've got good amount of balance. You've got quite a solid rail. There'd be very little to be done on that bit of track, apart from clearing vegetation and tidying it up. A lot of the track is like their centre 3 photos. You can see there that you've got a reasonable alignment, but you've got 1 in 3 steel sleepers. A lot of the wooden sleepers are very much decayed. They need to be replaced. The rail is short, would need to be upgraded. The rail lengths are short, would need to be upgraded, and there'd be a bit of work to be done. But this is the reality is this track as it goes through here is in no worse condition than many regional corridors that are operating in New South Wales right now. An issue is not so much could you run a train. The issue is more how fast can you run a train. So the key thing we're doing is we're upgrading the corridor. Is we're enabling a high-speed operation, which is what we need to get a good service, a good passenger service to the people in this area. This last photo is really interesting at Gilston Heights. This is actually the current condition of the track there, and you'll see, and this is Gilston Heights looking towards Maitland. You'll see that track has been recently upgraded with concrete sleepers and good ballast all the way through. So, and in fact, that's the condition of the track largely from Maitland down to Curry. So it's about a third of the corridor is of this condition. And what that means is there's very little to be done on that third to actually get the track into a good serviceable condition. So there's not a lot of work for a third, and the middle portion we would need to be upgraded a fair amount. And noting there's a bit like the bit of Bellbird there, which already got concrete sleepers that don't need much work either. Looking at the structures, now there's not really a lot of significant structures in this corridor. The ones I've got here are all at Abermain, and they're the most significant ones. There are a few other culverts and waterways, water crossings and those sorts of things which would need to be checked out. I'm not a structural engineer by any means, so I don't pretend to be able to give you definitive answers here. But the structures here would need to be checked out and would need to be upgraded, or if necessary, or to be assessed for what upgrades necessary. But what we're not talking about are massive bridges and massive structures that need to be reworked. We're talking about 2 discrete things. This first one here, the bridge over Elizabeth Street and Swamp Creek at Abermain, and this other one here, the bridge over Charles Street at Abermain. So they need to be upgraded. They need to be checked out and refurbished where necessary, but they're not massive structures and there's not a lot of work. This is East Greta Junction, which is the connection up to Maitland. This is where the corridor is still actually being used. And you can see on some of these photos, or these two photos, where there's a lot of the sidings at East Greta Junction are used for storage of wagons or for track vehicles, track maintenance vehicles and other things. And there's commercial operations happening in that area. To get a corridor through here, we would need to allocate one or more track through the area. That would be the operating track. We would need to figure out how to maintain the sidings and provide them access and provide separation between the two different operations, all those sorts of things. So there's a bit of work to happen there, but again, nothing that's not doable. The track exists; it needs to be upgraded, but it's quite possible to upgrade it and to get a good functional alignment through there. I've got here some historical information about the alignment on the corridor. So you can see there along the bottom, this is for the South Maitland portion only, which goes from East Greta Junction through to Cessnock. So typically it had a ruling grade of 1 in 50, so that's the steepest grade on the corridor, 1 in 50. That's nothing dramatic. There's plenty of areas in the network which are that and steeper. The tightest curve is 201 metres at East Greta, but typically along the corridor is 300 or 400 metres radius. What that means, though, is with suitable refurbishing and appropriate adjustment of the track, this would allow for speeds between 70 and 100 kilometres an hour. And you could also look at options of curve easing to get improve your speed as well. And so that means you'll get a good alignment and a good journey time through the corridor, which would provide a good service. I'll come back to that in a minute. In terms of rolling stock, our proposal is that the Endeavour and Explorer cars that are soon to be taken out of service can be refurbished. So they're about to be replaced by the original rail fleet in the period 2028-2029. If some of those were to be refurbished, they could provide a service between Newcastle and Cessnock, and that would be quite a functional service. Those trains were built in between 1993 and 1996. So they're younger than the Tangara trains that operate in Sydney and are now currently going through a life extension process to keep them going. So if those trains can go through a life extension process, so can these ones. And they can provide a valuable service for people on this corridor without the cost of building new trains. There are already trains, the Endeavour Explorers, operating on the Hunter line, and so this is not necessarily introducing a new train. It's actually just expanding the fleet that's already operating. Our estimate is that it would take 5 trains on this corridor to operate an hourly service with a half-hourly peak flow. Again, I'll show you that in a minute. Endeavour and Explorer, as we've suggested, we would need a platform of 50 metres long, and we don't need a lot of complication. We just need shelter. We need open tap on, off, tap off. We need customer information facilities. We need ramp access for accessibility. We need car parking. We need bike and scooter storage. You'll see there, the bottom photo I've got is actually Lochinvar Station, which is on the line that heads west from Maitland. And it's an example of how simple this can be. So you can see in this photo, you've got a platform, which is just a short one, 50 metres long or so. And there's a ramp down to a car park. That's very simple. We would expect that with the population around the areas on the train to Cessnock corridor, that we need a much bigger car park than this. And we'd probably, as I've said, put some better facilities on the platform. But we're not talking complicated stations. We're not talking lifts. We're not talking, big stairs over the top. We're just talking quite simple because it's a single track. Where we have double track stations, so that would be Western and Avon Main, then a single island platform with pedestrian level crossing would be totally adequate. And in fact, Western here at the top there, you can see that just past that water tower, there is actually a pedestrian walkway already connecting into town, upgraded with appropriate protection and appropriate warning systems, totally adequate. So in terms of services, so our analysis, based on what I said before about the alignment about speeds, the analysis concludes that we could get an express train travelling Cessnock to Maitland in 21 minutes express, or 26 minutes with all stops. You can see the graph here showing how that train's going, and the purple one is the express train. the blue is the all-stop train. Once you get to Maitland, our argument and our assumption is that you would go to have a continuous train all the way through to Newcastle. There's no point having a stop at Maitland and change trains. Having analysed the timetable between Maitland and Newcastle, it's currently a 25-minute journey time plus 1 minute for every intermediate stop. So if we've assumed that we have stops at Victoria Street, at Warrabrook and Hamilton, so the purpose of those is Victoria Street connects you to East Maitland and it connects you to Maitland Hospital. Warrabrook connects you to Newcastle University, and Hamilton is obviously an interchange station for trains down to heading to Sydney. That gives you a total journey time Maitland to Newcastle, which is 28 minutes. So that means a journey time Cessnock to Newcastle is 49 minutes for an express train. Now, remember what I talked to you before about the timing by car? 46 minutes by car at best, or an hour 20 in peak, or 1 hour 37 by public transport. So when you can compare a 49-minute train journey to those things, you can see that this is totally viable and will provide an incredibly good service for the people of Cessnock and other areas as well. And particularly if you're facing a 1 hour 20 peak hour drive to get to work in Newcastle, then a 45-minute train is going to look very attractive in comparison. Just for the nerds amongst you, which obviously included me when I did this, here's an example of a timetable I've developed showing what the train could look like. And you can see I've shown an hourly train service from Bellbird through to Newcastle and back, with a half-hourly service, which is the express. And you'll see as well, all these lines down here, the ones between Maitland and Newcastle, are the existing train services. And there is plenty of space in the timetable to add these additional trains from Cessnock. And even once you get into around Hamilton and Newcastle, black is the services coming up from Sydney. And again, plenty of space to add in train services from Cessnock. This actually highlights another benefit as well, that means where the Cessnock train stops, which as I said was assumed was Victoria Street, Warrabrook, Maitland, Victoria Street, Warrabrook, and Hamilton. We are providing additional services for people in those areas as well. So there's actually benefits not just to the people around the Cessnock LGA, but also people all on the corridor who can catch an additional service on the existing track. So the train to Cessnock is not isolated and not a thing in and of itself. It actually would form the spine of an integrated transport solution for Cessnock and surrounding areas. So you can see there in the diagram, the train to Cessnock stations, on the one hand, you've got a connection to local buses, via buses to villages, to suburbs, to vineyards, all those sorts of things. And the other hand, you've got a connection to all the facilities, extended facilities in Maitland and Newcastle. So the hospitals, the destinations, to the wider transport connections, all those different things. So what it does is connect 65,000 plus people to three major CBD things: Cessnock, Maitland, and Newcastle, but plus many village centres all on the corridor. Three hospitals. You've got Maitland Hospital, you've got the Mart Hospital in Newcastle, you've got John Hunter Hospital in Newcastle, you've got the Newcastle University, you've got two TAFEs, one at Curry, one at Tyers Hill. You've got many high schools. There's three specialist high schools in Newcastle, which are a great opportunity for people from the Cessnock area to go to, including Merriweather High School, which is a selective public school, the Hunter School of Performing Arts, and the Hunter Sports High. You've got leisure opportunities like the beach, like John Hunter Stadium, these sorts of facilities. And then once you connect to the other transport modes, you've got many other destinations, so Sydney, wherever. And then coming in, there's opportunities for other people coming in. So things like people travelling into the Hunter Valley for vineyards, for the concerts, for other leisure opportunities, those sorts of things. So you've got the train to Cessnock is not an isolated bit of infrastructure. It's actually a spine to a much wider connecting area. Then, of course, in years to come, we expect more things to happen as well. So on the cards, high-speed rail is being talked about and developed. The train to Cessnock would already link people from the Cessnock area to use a high-speed rail. If a line was, or a corridor or a connection was ever built up to Newcastle Airport, again, the people from Cessnock would be already linked to that area, and whatever other developments happening. So what this really does is link in an integrated way the area of Cessnock into the existing public transport infrastructure and provide a great facility. So we've done a stack of costing work, and I've taken you through some of our assumptions about what we think is required. So refurbish and upgrade of 28 kilometres of track, noting, as I said, that about a third of that track is already in pretty good nick. One crossing loop, so I didn't point it out in the diagrams, but you would have seen it there, between Abermain and Western. We've assumed that you have a long crossing loop to allow trains to pass. New stable facilities down at Bellbird, upgrade of East Greater Junction, maybe the connection to the ARTC network. By my count and assessment, eight active level crossings, which includes pedestrian level crossings at Abermain and Western. New signalling infrastructure, signage and fencing, stations, as I've mentioned, upgrades, some upgrades, some new, some refurbished, rolling stock, all the stuff about bringing into service. Our estimate, about $200 million and 3 to 4 years of work. And then if you look at this, there's a diagram that shows you how we think it could work. So year one, well, 3 to 4 years being the first year being a business case, and then beyond that, about 3 years of work. Now, to put that into context, to give some flesh around this, I was at a lunch at one stage and happened to be sitting next to a chap who worked for one of the track maintenance companies that actually is based at East Greater Junction, so at one end of this corridor. And I asked him, how long would it take to upgrade that corridor to passenger operation levels? And he sort of had a chat to a few mates. And he says, about 4 weeks. So let's assume 6. 6 weeks is not a long time of actual work, and it just shows you that how little is required to get this corridor up and running. One of the great benefits of this corridor and the work and to do the work is it's not operating railway right now, so you don't have to worry about disturbing current trains. You don't have to worry about people who are using trains right now and disrupting their travel patterns. You don't have to worry about resumption of land. You don't have to worry about impacts on housing and those sort of things. The corridor is already there. It just needs a simple refurbishment. To compare that to some other work, so we've done a bunch of benchmarking to understand whether our cost estimate is in the right ballpark. An interesting comparison is this corridor, Parkes to Narromine, otherwise known as P2N, which is part of the Inland Rail construction. This part of Inland Rail was completed in 2021. Now, Parkes to Narromine was a railway corridor that was pre-existing, so it was already a corridor, and it required upgrading for about 100 kilometres. You can see that stats. This upgrade required a complete renewal of the entire thing. So ARTC, or the Inland Rail project, took all the infrastructure off and then rebuilt the track from formation upwards. So the formation, ballast, sleepers, rail, all new level crossings, all new crossing loops, all new signalling infrastructure, all new fencing and landscaping. And you end up with a cost of $344 million, which was $3.3 million per kilometre. So let's compare that to our train to Cessnock. Again, look at the scope there. 28 kilometres of track. We've got assumptions there about level crossings. We've got some new formation required, some new ballast, some rail. We've got one crossing loop. We've got signage, fencing, landscaping. If we apply that same rate, 3.3 million per kilometre, get to 93 million. And let's note a few things. Firstly, the Cessnock corridor would not need to be upgraded to the same standard as P2N. P2N was upgraded for interstate freight trains, so travelling at an 1,800 metre train travelling at 100 kilometres an hour, which is not what we're doing with a light passenger train going to Cessnock. Around 10 kilometres of our corridor probably needs no meaningful upgrade at all. So instead of 93 million, that could be a bit down to about 60 million. But let's also note the P2N comparison excludes stations and rolling stock, and we need to allow for escalation. So if you say that just upgrading the track is somewhere between 60 and 90 million, that leaves us with about $100 million for all the other things you've got to do, which again, as we've said, is not a lot of work, and we think it's totally viable. Let me give some comparisons of this corridor to put it into perspective. So we said before, this is the best value rail project in Australia by a long way. What I've got here is a graph that shows you the cost per person served of a bunch of recent rail projects and comparing it to train to Cessnock. So when I say cost per person served, in any given project, you look at the catchment area, and you understand how many people are living there. There's often a forecast of who will be moving in. And then they decide to build a rail infrastructure. And so I'm looking at all those people, the cost of building that infrastructure, and what it is per person. So you can see there, I'll talk about a specific example. Parramatta Light Rail Stage 1, right in the middle there. It's about $22,000 per person in the area. When that was announced, they said there was 160,000 people who would be serviced and would be provided service by Parramatta Light Rail Stage 1. That number, funnily enough, was in 2026. It wasn't 2021, it's 2026. So that was a forecast. Parramatta Light Rail Stage 1 is built in an area where you've already got Parramatta Station, Westmead Station. You've got the former Carlingford line, which was actually decommissioned to make this to build a light rail. So this was a bunch of stations that were there that were taken up. You've got a whole bunch of bus routes in the area, and you've also got West Metro going out there, where you've got a station at Parramatta North and Westmead going there as well. So you've got a bunch of existing infrastructure already providing public transport service to those people who live in that area, that 160,000 people. And yet the state government thought it was viable and worthwhile to spend $22,000 per person to give them another option. Now, I'm not saying at all that Parramatta Light Rail Stage 1 is not worth building. I'm sure it's a great facility and it's now operating, providing great service to those people. What I am saying, though, is if that is worth doing at $22,000 per person, then the train to Cessnock, which is somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 per person, is way worth doing. So let me give you one more comparison. The Woollahra station was planned to be built on the eastern suburbs corridor between Edgecliff and Bondi Junction. It wasn't built for various reasons. There is a space there on the corridor where the station could be built, and the Mints government has seen this as being low-hanging fruit. So an opportunity to provide a new transport facility and encourage development around the station for more residents. So if we look at this, in the 2021 census, at Woollahra, there were 6,000 people living in the suburb of Woollahra, which is not even all those people would be closer to the new station compared to being close to Bondi Junction or Edgecliff Station. The estimated future population, they say 10,000 new homes going into Woollahra, so that's 25,000 people at best. Existing public transport options in this area, they've got Bondi and Edgecliff stations. Now, those are about 1.8 kilometres apart. So even if you're directly in the middle of those two stations, you have less than a kilometre to walk to either of those stations. You have buses. There isn't any number of bus routes in the area. You've got ferries nearby. You've got what we're talking about as a wealth community with plenty of options right now. And in fact, many NIMBYs who won't want anything there. The cost of this, we're establishing that station, $200 million. So compare that to train to Cessnock, 65,000 people, not 6,000 now. 95,000 people in the future around the corridor, not 25,000. Limited options right now in terms of public transport, and a needy and disadvantaged community, $200 million, same price. So if Woollahra is low-hanging fruit and good value, which it probably is, then the train to Cessnock is, as we've heard from many people, an absolute no-brainer. It's so much better value than Woollahra. So just looking at the future as well. So I've talked a bit about what we think is a possible starting opportunity to just get the corridor up. Our view is we should get the corridor moving, get refurbished, get passenger trains operating as quickly and as cheaply as possible, because if we can do that, then we're providing a service to the people of Cessnock sooner rather than later. And that's the aim here, is to provide the service. Every year that gets added to that cost because of providing a bigger and better service or doing more in here or there is just 1 year that the people of Cessnock don't have that service. So we should ask ourselves carefully why we should do more work rather than absolute basic work to get it up and running. But once it is up and running, there's plenty of options for enhancing. So additional stations. I've shown up here a station that could be put at Loxford. In fact, with the developments that happened over there, that are now happening there, you might want to actually start with that from day one. But as I mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of development happening in this area around Loxford. You provide a connection through to Cliff Lee, and then you've got the light industrial sites happening out here as well. So this here is Curry TAFE. So you've got a whole bunch of things going on there that probably could do with the station right from day one. Enhancing services. Over the time, you would expect that the population would grow. Well, as the population grows, you'd expect more and more services required. That would require move to double track, that would require you to increase the services, the frequency of services. The corridor itself was built and was originally constructed with double track, so the corridor is wide enough to accommodate double track, and that could be upgraded in due course. Interestingly, if you think about the corridor that goes from Sutherland to Cronulla in Sydney, the peninsula that services has around 120,000 people who live in that in the 2021 census, and along the corridor itself, right close walking distance from the corridor, about 95,000 people. Now, that's exactly the population numbers that are going to be along this corridor in 2041. That corridor right now gets a six trains an hour, so a 10-minute service connected through to Central. If you imagine that here, we've got the same population and the same need. By 2041, we would need to have a much better corridor than just 1 train an hour, based on that link. I mentioned before the extension to Millfield that could happen in due course. I'll talk about the heritage stuff in a minute. In a minute, there's a stack of opportunities for using heritage. The corridor, the south. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. We've got freight opportunities. I've talked about the Loxford site, the Hez site, which is actually sort of to the south of Western, is another area with industrial opportunities. And we'd also see the opportunity to establish rail industrial servicing facilities, so things like rolling stock services centres along this corridor to service things like the Hunter Valley Railways and provide, because you have easy access to the main lines from somewhere like Curry. Let me talk a little bit about heritage. So this corridor, the South Maitland Railway, is almost a snapshot of heritage, with heritage facilities all along it. You saw the photos I showed you of East Greenwich Junction up here, which is one of the oldest and largest signalling installations still standing, with mechanical semaphore signals happening there. You've got a whole bunch of other heritage items all on the corridor. You saw things like the water tower at Western and other things. So we would see there's a great opportunity to establish a heritage operation in this area, which would be a whole new tourist facility for the area, a whole new tourist opportunity, and could augment the passenger operations for something, using the corridor. This would link well to the existing Richmond Vale Railway. This is actually a portion of the adjacent Richmond Vale Railway that is residual and still in operation, or has been in operation at Heritage Railway. It stopped about here at the moment, but there's actually an old corridor, an old alignment that connects it up to Western, so you could easily connect that on and start having an interesting heritage operation in this area, which would be a whole other tourist facility, as we said. So why now? Why should the government move on this right now? So this corridor is consistently identified in planning documents as requiring better transport. I have gone back through planning documents for the last 10 years, and you'll see that they go in progression from firstly identifying that the Cessnock to Maitland via Curry corridor is underserved, it needs better transport. They then move on to conversations about this corridor, this railway line needing to be upgraded and introducing passenger services. So this is not a new thing, it's been recognised for a while. The population of the corridor is booming. So these two photos here, you can see that these are actually around Gilliston Heights. This one was actually taken a couple of years ago, and you can see the railway line running at the back here. These housing blocks would now be full of houses. This here is an old station near Gilliston Heights, and you can see in the background here houses. So, and this is a sporting field just here. So you're in a perfect spot to connect a community that's booming along that corridor. And as I mentioned, there is population booming in many other places as well along the corridor. So it's not just Gilliston Heights and those sorts of areas. Rail operation ceased in 2020. So the railway line is now dormant, but it can be restored to operation right now at a relatively low cost. But every year that goes past, it will cost more. So as time goes past, there'll be things like trees growing in the corridor. There'll be some of the embankments or some of the formation will be suffering from lack of maintenance. Some of the structures will as well. As things go on, it'll cost more and more to upgrade it. So right now, quite cheap operation. But more importantly as well, if there's no action, the real risk is that this corridor will be gradually dismantled and be sold. This is a commercial. Both the companies that own this right now are commercial entities. They're deriving very little in the way of revenue from that corridor. In fact, it probably represents a risk for them. In addition, though, Yancoal, which owns the last bit down from Cessnock down to Bellbird, for their portion, this is actually considered mining infrastructure, and they are currently going through the process of dismantling their mine and rehabilitating the land, and that includes the railway line. So without action, they have an obligation to be ripping up their section of track and removing all the infrastructure. So that means that practically it will be lost unless there's government intervention here. So that's why it needs to happen now. Not only are we providing a great facility for the people, but it's timely, because if we do it now, it will come at a much lower cost than it will be in 5 to 10 years. Third summary. The South Maitland Railway corridor represents a significant opportunity to support regional growth through the reuse of what is now disused rail infrastructure. With a suitable upgrade, it could form a spine of a vital public transport corridor servicing over 65,000 people and a rapidly growing population. And at an estimated cost of around $200 million, it's the best value rail project in Australia by a long way. Thank you for watching.